This video is sponsored by me, because who else would it be sponsored by? Huh? Alrighty, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I have another topic that I'm not sure how relevant it's going to be, but it has been asked by a couple people, and it was brought up on a live stream not that long ago. So I thought it was a pretty good topic that I could work some stuff into that were very relevant and very recent issues, or something that I could talk about that was very relevant to my current state. And that was the question of education, specifically on education when it came to voice acting. But I'm going to cover it in a wider sense. Now, the most recent inquiry into education when it comes to voice acting was on a live stream, and it was presented as, and I'm not going to word for word, but the idea was, should you go to college for voice acting, and or were there any courses or degrees in college that would benefit you in voice acting? But I'm going to go a little bit step further and ask the question, and or hopefully answer the question: is college or education necessary? And these are two things necessary for voice acting, for this kind of freelance career. Now, the simple answer is no to part of this. There are courses and degrees that you can get that will actually and can actually benefit you in voice acting. However, it's not necessary, and having the degree will not make or break your career. Now, this topic is kind of hard for me to cover without going into too much of a rant, so I'm just going to apologize in advance that I may get a little ranty on this one. I personally am against college in general. I'm not against education, and that's why I made the distinction made the point that there is a distinction between the two. There is a difference between education and college. You can get education outside of college. College is no longer the only place you can get educated. And considering the fact that most people nowadays, most employers, most companies, most businesses, don't actually care too much about degrees anymore. It used to be extremely important. Before the internet became the treasure trove of information, the smorgasbord of self-educating with practical and relevant information, you had to go to college. Now, there are still areas where you have to have a degree, and I mean this. You have to have a degree. One is obviously anything involving law, anything involving whether it's being a lawyer, whether it's being a police officer. I'm trying to think of anything else. I was like, what else would be law other than a judge, lawyer, and that kind of thing? Anything involving law, you would have to have a degree. You need to be up to date with all that information. And we need to know that you have that kind of information, that you did get educated, that you dedicated that much time to getting a degree in that field. Same thing with a doctor, anything in the medical field, becoming a doctor, anything in medicine, anything in chemistry, anything like that is very, very important, especially basically anytime someone's lives are at stake, whether it's financially or it's their actual physical life. There needs to be assurance that you do know what you're talking about. You cannot just have, doctors just, being self-taught off YouTube, going in and then operating on you. Absolutely not. Even when it comes to like first aid, even though you can learn a lot of basic first aid, on YouTube, if there was a situation where there was someone who was a trained, MT or whatever it's called, versus someone who had just watched a lot of videos, even if they knew the exact same and had practiced the exact same amount and were basically on the same level, the guy who has some kind of certificate is going to have, seniority, obviously. So anytime someone's life is in danger, is in risk, or can be seriously affected by your education or lack of information, a degree is 100% necessary. However, there is this stigma and there is this idea of education and of college that I feel is unhealthy, toxic, misinformed, and just flat out wrong. Not everyone needs to go to college. That's the first thing. Not everyone needs to go to college. So if you're wanting to get into voice acting and you're like, do I need to go to college? No. If you want to go into acting, voice acting, writing, arts, anything like that, you do not need to go to college. Let me say that again, because this is incredibly important. There are too many people out there who are going into college or going into any kind of university, going to go take a course, who are setting themselves up for a significant amount of life-ruining debt that they do not need. And they're coming out with less information, less education than if they had just spent those years watching every single YouTube video they could find on that topic. When it comes to the arts, it is insane how much you do not need and should not waste your money on college. Now, I would like to say that there are tons of educators on certain topics, whether it's the arts, whether it's music, who are great at educating. And there are some people, and this is another thing that I'm going to go into, there are some people who do benefit from being in a classroom, who do benefit from the more hands-on rather than watching videos. Everyone learns differently, which is one of the reasons that you don't need to go to college. Not everyone needs to go to college. Not everyone needs a degree. You do not have to have these things in order to be successful in the arts. And I would actually say it's more advantageous to not go into college for these kinds of things. What is needed is a job. You need a job. Now, this is where a lot of stigma and a lot of propaganda and a lot of misinformation and a lot of just flat out lies comes into play. There's still this idea that in order for you to get a good job and make good money, you have to have education. You have to have a degree. You should have up to high school. Okay, don't get me wrong. You should basically have up to high school on whatever level, whether it's being homeschooled and getting your GED or going to high school. You should have that. Now, I'm going to talk about something in just a second on that topic, but you should at least be at that level. And the reason is because when it comes to high school, which is, grade school to high school, anything before college, the idea is to give you a general splattering of information that will spark your interest in certain avenues and give you at least an idea as to where to look for the answers to certain questions. That's the point of grade school. That's the point of high school and junior high, is to give you the ideas and the information that will help you at least point in the right direction towards an actual career, towards the rest of your actual adult life. That's the point of those. It's not to set you up for, whatever. That's the point of that's the point. College was supposed to be the next step. So college was more specific in that area. So before you get out of high school, you should know what it is you want to do with your life. And so many people, I don't know whose fault it is, but there's so many young people who have no idea what it is they want to do with their life before they get out of high school. They have no idea. And then they get out of high school, they still have no idea. You're an adult now. How do you not know? How do you not know what you're good at, not know what your passions are? How do you not know? How's that possible? I'm really getting the idea that it is something that's happening in the schools that's actually making young people think that they shouldn't have to figure that out. That college will actually help you figure that out. No, college isn't to figure out what it is you want to do with your life. You should already know what you want to do with your life. It shouldn't be, before, when you're sitting down with that person to figure out what classes to take, that's when you figure it out. No. Long before that, you need to know what your talents, your skills, your passions, you need to know where you want to live. Hopefully by that time you have a good idea of the kind of people that you want to marry. You should know all that before you get out of high school. College is specific. It's supposed to be specific. So if you want to go into a specific thing and you cannot find that education elsewhere, then you go to college. But you don't go to college because parents want you to go to college. You don't go to college because community wants you to go to college, or your friends are going to college, or because you feel like you have to. No. College is very specific. It's not an impulse buy. It's not something that you just take on because you feel like, oh, well, all my friends are doing it. No, you have to know. If you don't know, don't. If you want to wait. If you end up never going to college, don't go to college. There's no problem with that. Just don't take on those careers that would demand that you need that level of education. If you're wanting to go into, for example, like creative writing, you don't need a degree in creative writing. You just prove that you're a creative writer. You can get a job as a creative writer in creative writing without having a degree in creative writing. That got harder to say as I said it. Now, it is beneficial in most larger studios or larger companies where you could get hired as a creative writer to show your degree, but it's not necessary. Showing your work is more beneficial, is far more impactful than a piece of paper. A piece of paper that has your resume and that actually shows your work versus a piece of paper with a signature from an educator. I would take the resume and proof of your skills over some fancy document if I was hiring you. Absolutely. I do not care. Because there's also a lot of people that go to college and they pass, but they have no real skill. I don't know how they pass. They don't actually know what they're doing. And this kind of comes down to my overall, and one of the reasons that I'm really ranting on this is because it comes down to the overall failure rate of our education system now. Not just high school. High school is abysmal at this point. High school, there's so many people that can't even, they're not even at they're not even at junior high level of reading, math, and science and history, before they get out of high school. I don't know what is happening, but it is horrific how much people are not being set up to succeed. That they're just, people are just passing, kids are just passing, and they're not prepared. And that goes to say college is significantly worse. I think it's less than 1 out of 4 people actually graduate and go into that field that they actually got a degree in. Now, not all of those people are actually making a significant amount of money to make it worth the effort. But that means 2/3 either dropped out, didn't go into that field after they got the degree, or, they graduated, went into that field, but weren't making enough money. And they couldn't pay it off. Basically it ended up being just a waste of their time. The majority of people, however, drop out. drop out of college because they went in with the idea that they had to go to college, and they signed up for courses and they didn't enjoy it. They didn't like it because they didn't know what they wanted until after they realized it was too late. After they realized, oh, this isn't what I wanted. You need to know in advance. And too many young people are doing that, and they're setting themselves up for failure. And, I don't want to go into the whole debt forgiveness thing. I think there is an argument for it because it is our fault forcing people to go to college and telling them that they have to, and then not actually properly educating or informing them, and then not setting them up for success. There is a small part of me that actually does believe that there is, an argument to be made there. So I'm not really going to go into that too much, but it's a huge waste of money. Most colleges also nowadays, they're not just universities. College tuition and the cost has gone up tremendously. Before, there was no campus. It was just it's a bunch of buildings. There was no living on campus. There was no Starbucks. There was no movie theater. There was no roller coaster. There was no flume ride. There was none of this. There was no lazy river. There was no petting zoo. There was none of these things in college. It was just the buildings that you'd be educated in, and then outside of college, outside of the campus area, is where you would live, sleep, eat, and do all this. But then they wanted to run them more like a franchise. They wanted to run them more like they wanted to make more of a profit, and so they started putting in stuff on the inside to keep students there and spending money in the campus rather than in the community. But in order to vindicate these extra useless, amenities, these things that didn't need to exist within the campus area, they had to bring tuition up. Also, they started adding a lot of degrees that you can't make money off of. And that's another problem that I have is degrees that are essentially useless on their own. There's tons of these. And I'm not going to go down the full list of them, but there's a tons of degrees that you can't really, like, if you take a single degree and you can't get a job off that degree, that individual course, then it's useless. There are some degrees that are the same way, but there are courses or classes that are basically just sandwiched in to these degrees. It's like, oh, you want to be a blacksmith. Oh, well, you need to know ballet as well. It's like, what? What's that got to do with that? Oh, you got to take it. And then they just jack up the price because you're taking these extra classes that aren't necessary, that really aren't necessary. And it make it very, very hard for you to just go in and just take a class. You have to get like this bundle, this package deal that just makes it extremely expensive. And it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be as expensive. There's so much within these, the way it's structured that just, it's not financially positive for you. It's a huge waste of money, a huge waste of time, as when you're taking classes and courses that you really shouldn't just for a particular degree. And the success rate is very, very low because we're not setting people up in advance to college so that they can go into a degree that they're confident about. So when it comes to me, I say avoid college, especially when it comes to the arts, at all cost. Spend that money. Let's say you did have the money to go to college. However, if you did have the money in advance, whether it's your parents footing the bill or you worked all the way, a good chunk through high school and a good chunk up to college so that you could go to college for a particular degree, that means you probably already know what you wanted to go into. And then if that's the case and it's already paid for and you're not going into debt, go to college. You're making the right choices. You already know what you want. You're focused. Go for it. Don't let me stop you. Go for it. You're probably going to do a great job. That's the mindset that's going to give you a good leg up on life when you get out. Go for it. But if you don't know and you just want to go in, or you're being told to just go to college, and then you just end up like getting drowned in debt, no, absolutely not. It's bullshit. Especially when it comes to voiceover, because you can just come and watch YouTube channels like this. Watch my videos. You can go to Bill DeWeese. You can go Mike Delgadio. You can even Earl Hall. And I mean, there's so many voice actors who are just sharing their expertise, their opinion on marketing, on studio setup, on editing, on script reading. And then you can just get coaching. You can just get one-on-one coaching, which would be the equivalent of just, getting a very particular class rather than taking an entire course. You don't need a communications degree, which could be beneficial. You don't need creative writing, which could be beneficial. Liberal arts, acting. You don't need these. But there are actually a few that could benefit you. Liberal arts, kind of. Creative writing, yeah. Communication, sure. Acting, probably more beneficial, especially if they focus a lot on improv. Improv is probably far more advantageous than just the acting. Because sometimes there's some acting classes in some colleges and universities where they kind of teach you exactly what to do instead of giving you tools and free rein to explore the ideas of acting, to explore acting on your own. And so there's a lot of people that just come out and they all act exactly the same way. They all deliver lines the same way. And so, there's some universities and colleges and classes and courses that are like that. So I try to avoid that kind of stuff. So generally speaking, I say it's better to do than to go to class on that kind of thing. And improv is way more beneficial. But there are some areas. You also can go and become an engineer. You can become a sound engineer, rather. And you can learn mixers, you can learn production, music, all this kind of stuff. And that actually would benefit you in voiceover. But the voiceover itself, no. Because the stuff that goes into actually becoming successful and getting noticed and getting the work and getting good at it and building a good studio isn't really covered in college. I mean, you can probably go for marketing. That's probably the most beneficial. But outside of that, going to college for voiceover, no. Going to college for some tools that would orbit around the over-encompassing idea of voiceover that may benefit, I don't know why I said it that weird, benefit your voiceover career, yes. But you don't have to. And unless you already knew where to go, who to talk to, and you already had that money lined up, and you weren't going into debt, there's no reason. Now, I'm going to extend this one more step. And this is where it came into the topic of practicality or more relevancy in my current situation. So I don't have even a GED. I didn't go to junior high. I didn't go to high school. I was homeschooled for a good chunk of my life, mostly because my family moved around, but also because I'm severely dyslexic. And because of that, it made a high school level education very, very, I'm not going to say impossible, but it made it very difficult and it made it very stressful for me. Even just trying to go and study for a GED was painful. Also, the fact that the area where I was living when I was thinking about taking my GED and getting my GED, the Adult Learning Center, which is where you go and do that, was basically operated by assholes and douchebags. And they didn't like people asking them questions. They didn't like being bothered. And it was a large area, and I had to look up material to study for the test. And they hated being there. They hated everyone that was there. And they had like multiple piercings, tattoos, and like half of their hair on one side was all gone and it was dyed. And they were just, it was all of them. Supposedly there was one sweet old lady that people told me about, but she was never there when I was there. And it pissed me off. The fact that there was this complete and total disregard for helping people, for assisting in education, for basically the stuff that I've already been talking about. And I already knew that I wanted to be an actor and a voice actor and a comedian. At the time, I wasn't thinking about being a writer. And I said, screw it. I don't need this. I don't care for it. It's pissing me off. It's wasting my time, my energy, my money. And I flipped it the bird, flipped even the idea of getting my GED the bird. I flipped college in general the bird. And I decided to go and watch as many YouTube videos as I possibly could on the topic of voiceover, on the topic of comedy, on the topic of acting, on the topic of editing, on the topic of studio building and sound engineering and all this kind of stuff. Now, to get me the rest of the way, I do have to take coaching and I do have to take workshops and stuff like that. And there is a bit of a struggle with the reading, with the copy that is presented to me by the coaches. But it's easier for me because I didn't waste my time trying to get that kind of education that wasn't relevant. And there's no amount of education that I would have gotten that would have fixed my dyslexia. There's no fixing it. It's going to be there for forever. I'm always going to be making mistakes. I'm always going to be taking my time reading so that I don't make mistakes. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be there. And so there was no point in getting education. Now, I say that to say this. Everyone is different. Everyone learns differently. Everyone is educated differently. And I feel like that is one of the problems with a lot of educators, with a lot of colleges and universities, is that they don't respect the uniqueness of everyone who is going to gain education. Everyone learns differently. There's so many people on different spectrums, whether it's Asperger's, autism, dyslexia, ADHD, what have you. There's so many different disorders and so many different levels of complications with thought process or learning that makes the cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all solution that's been around for a very long time not practical. It makes it it's kind of insulting, actually. The idea that you could just put down one textbook and one formula to teach everybody, that kind of pisses me off. Because I know I'm not the worst when it comes to how difficult it is for me to read. I know there's a lot of people who have it harder. I know there's a lot of people who have multiple issues that overlap and, make their situation far more stressful than me. When I was in California, when my family lived in California, one of the schools that we went to, or one of the schools that I went to, back when we were, living in an area for a long enough period of time that they thought it would be beneficial that I go to school rather than being homeschooled. There was one school, and I'll never forget it because it was horrible. This was back in like very, very early 2000s or late 90s, like 1999, something like that. And I wasn't too old. And this was really before, because nowadays we do kind of have a good bit more of an understanding of various different learning disabilities. But at the time, at least in the area that I was, it really wasn't something that people were focusing on. So for me, instead of going outside, PE, it was going to a specific learning disability class. But the problem with this class was it was for everyone with a learning disability, every different kind of learning disability in one classroom. Also, I didn't like the fact that every single window had bars on it, and there was barbed wire on the fences. That also didn't make me feel well, and everything was poorly lit, felt like jail. But I was brought in because of my dyslexia, but in the room were kids with Down syndrome, kids with autism, kids with Tourette's, deaf, the blind. There were, every possible unique. There was also kids that were just, assholes that the parents insisted were, oh, he's just ADHD. It's like, no, that kid's punching another kid. That's not an ADHD thing. He's just an asshole bully. And then they had one teacher to try to teach all of us. And at the age of 6, it was already known that I had, an IQ of 136. And at the same time that they had tested me, and this was a little bit before the California thing, they was when they found out that I was dyslexic and was hyperactive. So I wasn't stupid. I wasn't unintelligent. I just had issue with a particular method of learning, with particular areas. But it was never tailored to me, and it never has been, for my particular specific needs. Education has never been that way for me. It's always been tailored, not even tailored, just made for people with no learning disability, no issues at all, just, assuming that everyone is on the same level. And I'm not saying that kids can't learn like that, but they do need specific help. They do need to take longer sometimes. They do, there are some things that are just not going to stick as well. There are some topics that are going to be harder to understand. There's going to be some types of homework that actually isn't going to benefit them. That's just not going to work. And that's a problem that we have with education, and that goes all the way from the earliest age all the way to college, is that exact same problem, exact same mindset. It's too old school. It's too old-fashioned. It's too trying to beat unique puzzle pieces into a specific shape like everyone else. And that doesn't work. When you're trying to make someone learn the way you want them to learn, you're wasting a lot of both theirs and your time. Instead, you need to educate based on the level that person needs help at. You need to help them on their level. And though there are good teachers and there are good schools, there are good high schools, there are good universities, there are good faculty, I'm not saying that this is everyone. I am saying that it's general, though. I am saying it, generally speaking, there is a problem, but it's not everyone. But this is why there's a lot of people that are failing, that are just not making it in life with the way they're being taught. And then you take those exact same people and you tell them that they have to go to college. And they only barely passed. They didn't actually memorize anything. Tests have shown that, studies have shown that tests and quiz you don't actually retain stuff the same way. The way you retain memory is either extremely negative or extremely positive. If it's mundane or it's repetition, it's not as strongly put in there. So again, there's a hard problem with the methods. Then they take these kids, these young people, after not properly educating them, they barely pass, forcing them into college, they build debt, they don't know what they want to do with their life, and you have a whole bunch of miserable people. That is my review on the education system, and that is my thoughts on education in general, and the fact that you don't need to go to college. You don't. Especially not for voiceover, especially not for the arts. If someone's saying that you have to go to college, they're wrong. There's only a specific areas where you have to. Law, medicine, science, those are areas where you definitely need education, but if it's in the creative or the artistic, you don't have to. You can be 100% self-taught, and you can make as much, if not more money than someone who went to college. Probably more, because they'll be paying off that debt for a long time. But yeah, you don't need to do any of that. And that's kind of more or less the direction that everything's going. is more online stuff. It's more learning, bits at a time and presented in ways that are more digestible. There's tons of YouTube channels, Smarter Every Day, Backyard Scientist, Veritasium. All these kinds of shows are extremely beneficial because they present information in a fun and interesting way, and they focus on a particular issue, and they try to do their best to not only tell you what it is, but through visuals also show you what they're talking about, and then include examples and parallels or references or analogies to further drive it home. The education system, when it comes to junior high, high school, just school in general, and college, needs to actually take a good hard look at YouTube, at Udemy, at all these other online platforms, and learn from them. It's not the other way around. We're not learning from them as to how to teach. They need to learn from YouTube. They need to find out a way of doing what people online are doing and reaching people on a more personal and a more individual level. Also, the fact that people can ask questions and are not just being told to shut up or that's a stupid question. It's like, the whole, like, you got to show your work. You got to show your work. Really? Really? I got to show my work? Do I have to do that every time out in the real world? Do I? Unless I'm like a scientist or I'm like an accountant or something like that. If someone just asks me a question, I just give them the answer. They're not going to be like, well, dude, you got to show the work, though. It's like, I'm just buying apples, man. And that's more comfortably showcased in the online, individual, free education that's available rather than college, where you feel stupid, you're treated like you're stupid, you're not educated, and then you're set out to the world to not be successful. So this is a long rant because it's a very personal topic. It's very personal to me. 3 people in my family went to college and got a degree, didn't end up using it, or dropped out of college. And the only person who ended up using it and didn't drop out ended up not really halfway through his life, didn't end up actually still having the job anymore. And his education was basically irrelevant. It didn't last. It didn't go into another area. It was so specific, and he just got replaced by basically technology. So it's not a guaranteed future. It's not a way of fortifying yourself financially. It's not a way of making sure that you have the career that you want. I mean, it can be, but it's not a guarantee. And it can very easily be waste of time, waste of money if you're going into the arts. But this is just my opinion. I do want to state that. And I'm sure there's going to be teachers or educators or colleges and universities who are going to leave something down. Actually, I would love that if they did. Please, if you want to debate in the comment section, go for it. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. But yeah, that's going to be it. So thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Totally fine. Subscribe if you're new, bell for notifications, and leave down the comment section below if you'd like to see me cover any other topics. And yeah, that's going to be it. So until next time, peace.